I think I can try to encapsulate what I said, which was that Mr. Nelson, as an elected council member, had a vote on all matters coming before the council, except those where he is prohibited by law from voting. Therefore, the fact that he had the right to vote is not a special privilege. He's not using his position to secure that privilege because he has that privilege by virtue of the position he occupies. And therefore, he did not violate 2104.043 because he didn't use his position to secure anything, the right to vote. He already had the right to vote.
So from the way I see it, even if the voting on the voting against the other candidates was construed as somehow a special privilege, it was construed to be somehow inappropriate. There's no evidence being presented that he had expectation that the other candidates failing to achieve nomination would result in his nomination.
Right. Let me try this on for
his appointment. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So, your position on this is that Mr. Nelson
he had the right to vote. He had the right to vote.
He had the right to vote on all candidates other than himself, because in so doing, he could not have secured any privilege for himself.
Correct. None of the candidates was a family member, or, to the best of my knowledge, none of the candidates was a family member or someone else who, if it had been appointed, would have resulted in a benefit to him.
Okay.
Well, do you want this one divided up? If you wanted to say something like that?
Yeah, I think we need to do that.
It's sort of...
So in voting on candidates for the position, Mr. Nelson could not have secured a special privilege because he did not stand to benefit in any way by the appointment or non-appointment of another person.
I think you have to go back one step further. His voting on any candidates, his ability to vote on any candidate was a right he had already.
Right, which is kind of establishing that first.
So that's point one. He had the right to vote. He had that special privilege by the fact that he was a sitting council member. He chose not to vote on himself, and therefore did not expose himself to an additional special privilege. But that's the second bullet. And the third bullet, I'd say, is by voting against other candidates, he did not secure a privilege because there was no indication that would then result in his appointment.
I would argue that that point is irrelevant. That if he had the right to vote, what it's our position to determine is whether he violated the ethics code by voting, not by what the probable outcome of the vote would have been. So it seems,
That's speculation.
Well, it seems to me that anything that's said about anything after that is irrelevant to to the situation, because if he had the right to vote by virtue of his position on the council, he recused himself in a position from the one that would have been, in which he had a private interest, but determined he did not have a private interest in those other candidates, then I think you've answered the question. And I think what happened subsequent to that is irrelevant to what he did, the action he took.
I think in due respect, back to one of the points that Phil had raised earlier about the issue of reputation, I personally think it's incumbent on the Commission to make the statement that there was no evidence that by voting against the other candidates, that Warden Nelson had an expectation that he would achieve the nomination.
I was writing, and then your lips were moving faster than I was writing. So I'm going to move back to what I wrote, and I'm going to try and take this piece by piece. By virtue of the fact that Mr. Nelson was an elected member of the county council, Mr. Nelson had the special privilege to vote for candidates to fill the vacant position on the council. Therefore, Mr. Nelson did not use his position to secure special privilege in violation of WAC 2-104-043.
Well, I think you've got to be specific as to what based on which votes.
Okay, hang on. You can't move until I know whether we understand that piece. And then if we do, there's another thing to address, but I can't address them. I mean, I can't address them and get them out in front of you if we're moving. So,
would you repeat it then?
Yeah, let's just see the piece, because I think I want to get to that point. I just don't know how to get there, Rudd. So I say, by virtue of the fact that he was an elected member of the county council, Mr. Nelson had a special privilege to vote for candidates to fill the vacant position on the council. Therefore, Mr. Nelson did not use his position to secure a special privilege.
What I would say, if I were to say there is that because he did not, therefore, as he did not vote for himself, he did not use his position to secure a special privilege.
Okay. Can I do that as a second one? Because that's where you were running on. I agree with that.
Right.
So this is just the issue of the vote. He voted, what he did vote on was...
Can I make a distinction between two terms here?
Yeah.
We seem to be mixing the two. The special privilege is about the vote. The private interest is what he chose not to, and when he recused himself from voting on something in which he had a private interest.
I would agree with that.
So the first
So they do
part
need to be separated.
really does deal with, I mean, what Phil has said here, that by virtue of his position on the council, he had the privilege of voting. He did not use his position to secure a special interest. That's a statement in and of itself. He recused himself from voting on his own candidacy because had he voted, that would have been considered a private interest. Rather, that would not be relevant to a special privilege. It's a the private interest.
Actually, I think. Remember, the private interest only applies to law or policy. There's no definition of special privilege. But I think being appointed to the county council would be considered a special privilege. It would also be a private. There would also be a gain, private gain. So it would be a private interest as well. But it wouldn't violate the first one, 2-104-020, because for the reasons we've already said, it's not a matter of law or policy. So I think what Rudd said really brought them both together for me, which is if he had been voted for himself, he would have stand to gain financially, and therefore it would have been a private interest, and it would have been a special privilege. The appointment, and for both the appointment's a special privilege and being paid for it is a special privilege, and it's also a private interest. That's where you brought them together in my mind, right?
Well, I think the other crucial part about that is that in voting against other candidates and ending up with a deadlocked council did not give Mr. Nelson any indication or reason to believe he would end up with the appointment. So the act of voting against the other people did not create it. It was not to his financial benefit.
Okay. So
That's a good point.
So we've got one that we just went through, which is that he had the vote. Then we have the second point that you're making is that let's deal with not voting or voting on others didn't benefit him, and then let's deal with him not voting for himself.
So essentially we have three different parts here.
Yeah, three different parts. Maybe that's the easiest way to do
Yeah.
it.